Welcome to DDI Day 2021, the first of its kind, the first in a long series. As I've been saying, as people have been joining, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of old friends come back to join us in celebration of all the folks who manage critical infrastructure, specifically in DDI. I'm joined today by BlueCat's VP of Marketing, Jim Williams. Hello, Jim.
Hey, Christian. How you doing? Delighted to be here.
Excellent. Delighted. And also our special guests for today, who we will introduce in a moment, but should need no introduction, but we'll still give them one anyway. Russ White, Paul Mockapetris, and Ralph Droms. So we will introduce those gents formally in a few minutes. But let's kick things off today. Let's get excited. It's a celebration of all of you, almost 70 of you who've joined. Thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday afternoon or morning in some instances, or late evening in others. So let's kick things off. Jim, take us to our first slide today.
Thanks, Christian. You know, I love how Christian goes and introduces everyone else, but he doesn't introduce himself. So if you guys do not know who the great Christian Yaguchione is, he is BlueCat's community and customer marketing manager, and he, more importantly, runs a very successful community for DDI experts, pros, wannabes, hopefuls. Check it out. It's Network VIP. He's a fantastic host, does a great job. And all around good guy. So I'll make this real quick because I think we want to get right to the agenda and get on to the main events for today. But I'm delighted to do this today. And I have to give all the credit, of course, to Christian, who approached me about, I don't know, Christian, what was it, 4 or 5 months ago? And he said, you know, Jim, there's an IT Pros Day. There's an SDR Appreciation Week. It's just this host of events, and some might call them Hallmark holidays, but bottom line is they're meant to thank people for doing the everyday work that makes things hum all around us. And there just isn't one today for people that manage DNS infrastructure or DDI at all. It could be grouped into a broader IT Pros Day, but we like to get much more specific and much more specialized here at BlueCat. And so the whole idea here is to make sure that that lack of acknowledgement, which I'm sure all of you are well aware of, right? Pandemic hits, world goes to hell in a handbasket, networks get put under increasing pressure, but actually live up to it. And somewhere at the heart of all that is a community of people that are working tirelessly day and night to hold it all together. And so this is just an appreciation day for DDI, okay? Totally recognize that, you know, when it works and the lights stay on, you just did your job, you know, but when the proverbial shit hits the fan, it's the fault of the person managing DNS. It had to be DNS, right? So totally get that. Today is a day to just take a step back from that and just recognize DDI folks and thank you for what you've done here. So with that, Christian, let's say thank you. There it is. Well done. All the ways that we could quickly find on the internet to say thank you. But seriously, thank you for the work you've done and the time that you put into making these rather complex and rather sophisticated networks work. So why don't we jump ahead? Christian, you or I going through the agenda today?
Awesome. So today, obviously, I think we're all here for the main event, which we're going to lead with today. And I hope you'll hang out for the latter half of the presentation today. But we've obviously got our illustrious panel, which I'm on the fly decided to call DDI Then, Now, and Tomorrow, our panel which features Russ White, Paul Mockapetris, and Ralph Droms, who are already online joining us today. Gents, give a wave and a quick hello.
Hi.
There we go. Awesome. And following that, we're going to have a really brief bit of appreciation for all of you. So you'll want to hang on for that. And following that, we'll have our first ever DDI Day Awards. Total time for today, we're going to try to keep it. And those who are part of our NVIP community will have a laugh at this, but we'll try to keep it to an hour and a half. That is our hard measure. But I have someone with experience in leading discussion, Russ White. He is going to keep us on track for the first hour. I see Ekham's laughing there. He's familiar with it. And then in addition to that, the award should be very quick. But I hope you'll hang around simply just to support and applaud your industry colleagues. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panel of speakers for today. I can just find my screen. Oh my goodness gracious. There we go. So we're excited to bring you our DDA panel today and introduce our guests we are so lucky to have join us today. Kicking off, I'd like to welcome Paul Mockapetris. As some of you may know, Paul is best known as the creator of Domain Name System in 1983. He also wrote the first implementation of SMTP. He is a fellow at ACM IEEE and the US National Academy of Engineering. He is an internet advocate and an investor with interests ranging from high-speed switching to applications. He is currently the chief scientist at ThreatStop. Please give a round of Zoom applause for Paul Mockapetris. Woohoo! Next up is Ralph Droms. Ralph organized the IETF working group in 1989 that designed DHCP. Now we're up to 2/3 of DDI. He is co-author of the original DHCP RFCs, along with many other DHCP specifications and the DHCP handbook. He was previously on the research staff at Cisco, IBM, and Burroughs, and held faculty positions at Bucknell and Penn State. And he is currently a staff software engineer over at Google, just a little company. And of course, last but certainly not least, our host for this Wham Bam panel for today is Russ White. Russ designs, deploys, breaks, and troubleshoots large-scale networks. He has co-authored more than 40 software patents and is a co-host with the History of the History of Networking and Hedge podcasts, and serves on the Routing Area Directorate and the Internet Architecture Board at the IETF. He is currently infrastructure architect at Juniper Networks. And with that, everyone, if you would mind placing yourself on mute, Russ, take us away.
Awesome. Okay, so let's begin at the very beginning. And let's see, I think we just want to start within the beginning here. So I'll start with Paul. So give me the origin story for DNS, why it was needed, how it came to be, anecdotes, things like that. Now, of course, we're not on the history of networking, so you don't get the full hour this time, Paul.
Thanks. Basically, the 100,000 foot view is I was working on something else, and John Postel asked me to take a look at some proposals for things to do to improve the host table. I looked at them, didn't like them, and did what I was used to and designed the protocol, taking into account mostly my background. I once upon a time was a real rocket scientist, so I like redundancy and so forth. So that's how DNS came to be. And the reason it is the way it is nobody thought it was an important thing at the time. So nobody, gave me adult supervision. I always intended it to be much larger than my original mission assignment. And I think it's turned out that way.
So you were doing something else. What were you doing?
I was doing performance measurements of TCP, in which I decided that you could get a bit of TCP throughput for about 2 instruction cycles. Cool. But all these famous people and full professors were also doing that research. So I decided to run away to do this other thing where there was nobody else that was interested in doing it.
So a question about that. Did you ever finish measuring TCP?
I ended up doing a bunch of analysis of how fast TCP code could run, because I was interested at the time about offloading it onto an outboard processor to free up the CPU and so forth.
Which we do now, right?
I guess an aside is the first time I DDI'd, which I think is probably important, the tool I used was Emacs. But then I realized the worth of DDI when I was at a company called At Home, and we were rolling out cable modems to 100,000 people, we thought.
Well, it's interesting too, because you know, you're still here today, 10 years, however many years later, talking about DNS. And, you know, it all started basically with SneakerNet, right? And host files that you're just trying to carry disk around to get everybody's host files up to date. And it's kind of crazy doing that. So time to build something that will actually do it instead of doing it by hand. I don't know how many people remember SneakerNet, but we'll get there. And then Ralph, let's start at your beginning and talk about, you're more on the DHCP side, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've
so
done
why
some.
DHCP, the protocol everybody loves to hate, DHCP?
Well, yeah, everybody loves to hate. Let's see. So when I started working on DHCP in the late 80s, at the time, the way to set up the IP stack on a computer was page after page of to a lot of people incomprehensible instructions about put a dotted decimal number here, put a hexadecimal number there, add another name over here, put another name over here. And if you get any of these things wrong, nothing would work, and nobody would have an idea why it wasn't working. So it was something of the equivalent of SneakerNet. We got started on working on the problem because of a friendship I had struck up with the person who was then the chair of the IETF, Phil Gross. Phil and I had been grad students together at Penn State, and Phil was visiting me on a social visit. And I said, yeah, I've got this sabbatical leave from Bucknell coming up. I'm looking for something to do. And Phil said, well, we've got this problem of configuring hosts on the internet. And I said, gee, that sounds interesting. What do I do? So Phil said, well, come on down to Cocoa Beach to the next IETF meeting. We'll start up a working group and we'll see what happens. So that's what I did. I came to Cocoa Beach. We had about 30 people there. And we started tackling the problem of getting the initial configuration information to a host.
So that must have been a really hard place to go for an IETF meeting, Cocoa Beach.
It got worse about a year later. The IETF meeting in Hawaii with the Nerds in Paradise shirt. We had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home, and I had to go home and tell my family, yeah, I've got to go away to Hawaii for about a week. This was in March in the middle of Pennsylvania. And I said, honest, I will not enjoy myself at all, be in meetings all day. I will not be on the beach. It could be just any place else at all. And my wife just gave me a side eye and said, yeah, sure, go ahead, go.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to
a little nugget from that first IETF meeting. If you go online and you look for the notes for IETF meeting number 13, you can find the meeting notes from this first DHC working group meeting. And at sort of the bottom of the list of conclusions of the meeting is the schedule for finishing the protocol is TBD. And that turned out to be really prophetic because it's still not done.
Yeah. So actually I was going to ask that, going back to Paul for a second, did you expect DNS to last as long as it has and for things to go where they've gone? I mean, we're still using DNS. We're still arguing over DNSSEC. I just saw something on the IETF list this morning about DNSSEC and yet another huge conversation about DNSSEC. I mean, did you expect it to get as big and as complex as it is? Did you build it with that in mind in the first place?
I was expecting to scale it to the size of, the U.S. population. But I wasn't a fan of limits. Part of the structure of the DNS is due to mistakes I made when I was at the MIT Media Lab, where I made a file system that only had 2 levels of hierarchy. And I said, I'll never again have a fixed number of levels of hierarchy. I won't do it. Forget about it. And so, that it was actually sort of my experiences in there and at UC Irvine with the distributed computing system, where we addressed messages by name rather than by IP address, that kind of shaped a lot of my thinking. So I had all of this DNA kind of sitting there, and when they came along and said, create the DNS, I said, okay. That's where most of the ideas came from. But the one thing I'd say is if you design a tool and you know all the possible uses, it's not a very interesting tool. So from day one, I never expected to understand all the uses. And I expected, for example, that it would be used for storing more data than network configurations. I was kind of very disappointed that it didn't get used correctly for RFID tag information. But people do store mobile telephone information in private DNS databases. But I'll say this about DNSSEC. You know, there's at least 3 or 4 good years of work in that.
There's probably another 20 years worth of work left to do in it too.
I said
so Ralph, I mean, same thing for you, DHCP. I mean, did you ever expect to see it go this long? I mean, I know that people in IPv6 land have been trying to replace it desperately, but they just haven't yet.
Well, people in IPv6 land have been trying to replace IPv4 and haven't yet. But no, I had no idea it was gonna last this long. We seemed, as a group that did the original design, we seemed to have struck exactly the right balance between flexibility, like Paul was talking about. That is, it turned out not to be a single purpose tool. We left it pretty open-ended, and there have been any number of creative uses of this path for getting information to hosts that were completely unexpected. The other bit of design art that I think we landed on correctly was the amount of stuff we tried to carry in DHCP. We made a decision very early on. There was some push very early on to try to turn DHCP into a reliable delivery protocol, so sort of reinventing TCP. And we said, no, we don't want to do that. If you want that much configuration information, use a server and use TCP. DHCP is going to have one UDP message full of stuff, and whatever numbers you can get into one UDP message full of stuff is what we're going to carry in DHCP. And that simplicity has also contributed to the long life of the protocol.
Yeah, in fact, you know, I have a thing about the internet, and I call it the internet of 3 protocols, because we seem to use we seem to find a protocol that succeeds and we throw everything in it. It becomes the kitchen sink. We want everything to run in that one protocol. But yeah, so, I mean, what do you think about DHCP ever going away? Do you think Slack and other mechanisms will actually replace DHCP, or do you think we're kind of, it's going to be there forever?
I think Slack has replaced it in a lot of situations for IPv6, a lot of simple situations, but I think there will always be more complicated situations in which, for one reason or another, system administrators want or need to have control of the IPv6 addresses that are being used, where they'll want to have DHCP there for exactly that control.
Okay. And actually, I want to, should I wait for the end to ask these questions? I guess I should. I'll try to make a list of some of these questions that we go through. All right. So back to Paul for a second. In the original protocol design, were there things, I know we talked about this on the History of Networking episode when we talked about DHCP or DNS design. Were there things you think that you did that helped the protocol survive and thrive, like in terms of the way the protocol is designed?
You know, to me, it was a very simple thing to explain it in 883. You know, there's the original DNS RFCs came in pairs. Most people know 1034 and 1035. And so I tried to explain the model in one and then tell you how to implement it in the other. And I think that, you know, the model for what we wanted to get done was pretty simple. And I think that some of the successes were the things that I left out. So it wasn't like I didn't think that security would be important someday. I just thought that, you know, the Wright brothers, the way I explained it, their first airplane did not have a drink cart or a lavatory. So, you know, DNS, the protocol design was there to be expanded. And then other architects have made additions. I think people think it looks a little bit like Gaudi's cathedral now, kind of very strange structure, and people talk about the camel. and it's been modified a whole lot, but it's still standing. So, you know, I take credit for the basement and the first 2 or 3 floors of this building, and all the stuff on top of it. You know, credit goes to other architects. I mean, I did make some obvious things that I said, well, gee, you know, we're not going to have a way to do incremental update, sending only the changes, you know, but I expect that people would get around to it. And I'm always surprised when people say, well, why didn't you think of that? Well, I did think of it. I just left it out of the original design. It was just enough to get off the ground and fly. And I figured that was, you know, getting it off the ground, and then having people add things to it were my 2 big original hopes.
I think that's a skill we have forgotten in the modern technology world, is learning how to leave things out. Trying not to solve every problem from day one. So
yeah, and not painting yourself too much in a corner while you're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
But for example, you know, the biggest error ever in my head was that I always assumed that packets were going to get bigger as the network got faster, because I had taken classes in LSI design, and so I had seen that Moore's law had to happen. And so I made a lot of assumptions about the way things were going to go. But I'm surprised that we still talk about MTUs that are in, you know, 3 or 4 digits.
So Ralph, same question. I mean, are there things that you think that originally designed into DHCP that made it survivable? Or do you think it's more a matter of, oh, we just need this, so therefore we kind of stick with it?
I think it's both of those things. I think it was really very badly needed when we came out with it, and it was very popular as soon as Microsoft adopted it in Windows 95. It just absolutely took off. One of the things we did to enable early distribution was to piggyback it on a previous protocol called BootP. So BootP had already been in existence, but it didn't do automatic address assignment. And so what we did was we reused the BootP packet format so that we could get these DHCP messages through relay agents in routers, because we didn't want to have to wait for another cycle of, we didn't want to have to go to all the router vendors, get their acceptance of the DHCP format, and then wait for another cycle of router deployments to be able to get DHCP messages through DHCP relays in routers. So we squeezed it into the BootP format, which explains why a lot of why it looks the way it did. But then we left it flexible after that. There's just a very simplistic model of the server has some information to get to the client. Client identifies itself, and the server sends back a fairly small and fixed set of initialization parameters. Over time, we found that some of our initial assumptions about how that information would be stored in the server were extended with some very creative and clever ways of generating information on the fly to send to specific clients. The whole cable industry was extended when there was an extension to allow information to go from the client to the relay agent, and then on to the DHCP server. So there were sort of these incremental extensions to it along the way that all were accommodated in the fact that the basic format was fairly simple but easily extendable.
Okay. There's another question. I'll toss that on my list for the end. So are there things, I'll go back to Paul for a second. Are there things you've used currently holding DNS back? I mean, I know there's been a lot of discussion around complexity as one of those examples of things that are holding DNS back or causing problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole argument about the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, I think that it would be useful for the IETF, for example, to revisit 1034 and say, what are the principles you should be able to depend on in the DNS? I think that the centralization that's going on, I'm not sure I fear it. I suppose it may be inevitable just because of business interests. You know, the fact that the IETF for a long time wanted to kill off the DNS working group, but then created all these other ones. It's that I wish there had been sort of more architectural thought about it, but it's turned into a business, you know, and when you do that, the Darwinian imperative is to make money. And so we are where we are. But I hope it can go on. You know, I made my mistake in that regard. I sent a proposal into NSF called Index, and what I was going to do was use the DNS to build a distributed index of the internet. And they said, oh no, you can't do that. The internet's too big. It has like 1,000 or more hosts. I should have walked to Sand Hill Road where all the venture capitalists hung out.
Yeah.
You know, so, and security came much too late. In a way, the evolution, the lawyers and the marketeers have caught up with the evolution. I wish we had figured out how to stay a little bit further ahead of them.
Yeah, cool. And so what about you? What about you, Ralph? Any thoughts on what's holding DHCP back or replacing DHCP?
I don't know that there's really anything holding it back. It holds sort of a different place than DNS in the sense that there's not really much motivation for any particular group or organization to try to provide large scale services. The services are always on the scale of an individual network or an individual home network or an individual service provider. So the individual service provider, there's money to be made in building the tool that the service provider uses. There's money to be made in building a big enough, robust enough, efficient enough tool that can manage a service provider network with millions of hosts in it, but there's no underlying information to gather to commercialize, and there's no sort of global dependency to take advantage of, I don't think. Yeah, we talked briefly about IPv6 and DHCP, and I think there's sort of a balance that's been struck there. I don't think DHCP v6 is going to go away. It's going to continue to have a place, especially with prefix delegation and the way, and that sort of quick and dirty way of getting IPv6 prefixes to home routers so that you can have a real routable IPv6 network in your home. So I think it's sort of reached a background level of or a stasis of adoption and almost universal adoption. And I don't see huge amounts of innovation growth, but I don't see any blockers.
Okay. So, Paul, any ways in which DNS has been used that you're surprised by, that you didn't think of when you did it, and you're kind of like, oh wow, I wish I would have thought of that, or oh wow, I wish they wouldn't have done that?
Well, I guess the surprising thing is the amount of DNS traffic that goes on these days to make sure that things don't happen. So, in my day job, I'm working on, DNS filtering and related technologies to keep the network from working for the bad guys. So when I send email today, there's usually much more DNS traffic to figure out whether or not it's spam than there is to actually deliver the email. So those are the kind of things. I think one of the other things that surprised me, you said earlier that I was the first implementer of SMTP. The part of that I'm proud about was that the reason I was the first implementer of SMTP is I was trying to be an implementer of MTP, which was a prior design. And I said, too much stuff. and just tore out a whole bunch of it. And that's how I put the S in SMTP. But I was a graduate student, so I didn't get to be on the RFC at the time, but be that as it may. So, you know, I think that a certain amount of simplification in both DNS and DHCP would be healthy, or simple explanation of the concepts. When I was an IETF chair, I was trying to get the people that were doing, I guess it was called Apple Talk at the time, and the DNS people to work together, but no, they wouldn't. So, you know, I don't know, I figuring out how to have a good conceptual model and how to put things together, but keeping them as simple as possible, I think is the usual source of my frustrations.
Okay, very, very interesting. All right, so let's shift gears. Well, I mean, we've talked a little bit about the future of these protocols. Anything else you want to say, Paul, on the future of DNS that you see coming up that you think might be interesting to talk about?
You know, I question whether or not there should be more information that's associated with, you know, particular destinations. So for example, if what I wanted to do was to try and have content that had a reputation, should I be able to attach that reputation to the domain name? You know, I mean, I guess the web people, I viewed it as a design failure of the DNS that we had to invent URNs and URLs and URIs instead of being able to use domain names. And I can understand why they did what they did, but I always wonder whether or not it would have been possible to think about including things like optional attributes in domain names so that you basically could have used them directly instead of, you know, URIs.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a historical question real fast. You may not answer this, actually. It's okay. Why is it that the domain name has the less specific information on the right and the more specific information on the left?
It's very simple. People always argue with me one way or the other. And I always tell them, I want to be able to do auto completion, you know, where you start typing stuff. So if I started by typing com, I wouldn't know what I had in mind. You know? Whereas if I type BlueCat, it can figure it out.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. So Ralph, same question. Any thoughts on DHCP in the future? You said you didn't see a whole lot of room for growth just because there's not a lot of blockers, or, I mean, is there anything going on in DHCP you think that it really represents the future of DHCP or anything like that?
I know that in reference to something Paul said about simplifying and revisiting, there has been a lot of work recently actually in going back and cleaning up the work that's been done in DHCP to finish publishing the final full standard version of both DHCP v4 and DHCP v6. There are new options being defined to carry new information all the time. This was a while ago, there was the extension work for prefix delegation in DHCP v6 that enables IPv6 prefixes in home networks. But I don't know of any specific thing that's on the horizon that's really getting a lot of interest and a lot of work as a next step in DHCP. Maybe the folks that are listening in have specifics that they want to suggest or ask about.
Okay. So what about security and privacy in the context of these protocols? I'll start with you, Paul, because I think DNS is more likely to have a lot to be discussed here. Like things like DOH. I just saw a research paper the other day that said DOH really doesn't make things very private. So any thoughts on security and privacy for DNS? Like what's going on there, future of stuff or whatever?
You know, there's the joke about, you know, looking for your car keys where the light is good. You know, you could think about, you know, adding encryption onto DNS, and that's okay. That's a great idea, perhaps. You know, whether or not your network administrator should be able to look at your requests or not. You know, from a practical standpoint, if I was running a corporate network, I would want to look at those requests. You know, I think that DNS privacy is not gonna keep you from being in the surveillance state. I mean, anytime, if you're using the web, DNS privacy is, you know, I don't know, maybe 0.1% of your privacy. There certainly is some, I'll admit that. I once upon a time worked on a DNS server that would help a cable company figure out whether or not their customers were looking for other services. And there's, you know, there's a certain amount of surveillance that can go on there. But given the surveillance that's there in the whole web environment, you know, I'm still going to get weird requests for things I just looked at and offers to sell. And Google's going to be invading my privacy, as will Facebook and all of those other people. And no amount of DNS protection is going to stop that. The only thing that's going to stop that is when you stop some of the technology that goes on, you know, in the web world.
Okay. So Ralph, anything from your side for security and privacy around DHCP and things of that nature?
Same sort of thing that as Paul was talking about, there's not that much that's very interesting in a DHCP message to keep private or to try to secure. And the security with DHCP is a tricky thing to try to engineer, given that you have two entities that, in the beginning anyway, don't know each other, so they have to have some way of establishing mutual trust between themselves, but trying to do it in the context of very small UDP messages being transmitted back and forth. So we've had people look at trying to carry various kinds of security tokens, trying to do some initial handshake based on trusted identities at both ends. It's just it's hard enough to engineer with a low enough return on the investment that nobody's, as far as I know, followed through and developed a quote secure or private DHCP. But yeah, just, you know, handing back an address and a I mean, you might be able to mount an attack by spoofing a DHCP server or spoofing the message and pointing a host computer at a malicious DNS server, for example. But in general, it's just not proven to be an issue.
Cool. Okay. So another kind of contentious issue is this idea of centralization, and I'm big into this argument over centralization. I'm working on an article for it for publication, and I'm very curious what you think about. I'll start with Paul again. Like, do you think companies like Cloudflare, Google, et cetera, are kind of controlling the future of DNS and are trying to with DOH and moving DNS to the browser and stuff? Or do you think that it's kind of too late, there's too much already out there kind of a thing, and they're not going to be able to do anything with it? Or do you think it's not intentional on their part? Or what do you think is going on there?
I think it's intentional. I mean, the two biggest browsers are both controlled by Google, I guess, you know, or their other contributions to the Mozilla Foundation, at least in the past. Maybe that'll change. So, you know, nothing's going to happen in the IETF that goes against those interests. I do think that, you know, having people that are working on hardening the DNS, I mean, my view on it is Cloudflare presumably is doing this just because they want to serve more traffic. And Cloudflare is probably upset at the idea that I may want to filter out some of the groups that they host. I don't think there's anybody on this call, okay, who likes all of the organizations that use Cloudflare. Okay, I mean, you have several of the well-known terrorist organizations are all hosted on taking that filtering mechanism out, I think is one of the things I worry about. The other thing I worry about is things like devices that demand to use DOH and won't let you configure them. You know, Chromecast is an example of it wants to talk to 8888 regardless of what DHCP says. Maybe you should talk to the people at Google about that, Ralph. At any rate, you know, and the thing that's amusing is at least the Chromecast device that I was looking at didn't really care what 8888. So I could intercept 8888 locally. But in this world of DOH that's going to come, that may no longer be a possibility. I think that one of the big issues with DNS and DHCP is Internet of Things technology. I worked with a research place that had, you know, a visit from Chinese hackers who ran off with a bunch of information. But among other things, they were infiltrating the Internet of Things, the access control system for a biosafety lab, where they were working with Ebola and so forth, was compromised. You know, there's robotic surgery machines, you know, on and on and on, hospitals, ransomware. So I think that, you know, one of the things that people aren't paying as much attention to as they should is how do you harden the devices that can't use endpoint security? Sure, I can install, put CrowdStrike in my, or any of the other vendors in my computers, my endpoints. But what about all the Internet of Things devices out there? How do you protect them? And I think DNS and DHCP are going to be a couple of the attack vectors that people will use.
So any thoughts on the same question, Ralph? I mean, centralization, it doesn't seem to impact DHCP as much, or that end of the DDI world as much. Although it could to some degree, just in the fact that everybody's going to the cloud and therefore IP addresses themselves are kind of being part of the IP addressing situation, is almost moving from the RIRs allocating addresses to individual users and organizations down to the cloud providers taking over part of that role. Any thoughts around any of that?
Yeah, I think I agree that the centralization is not as much of an issue, especially with IPv6, where there's so many addresses, they're just free for everybody, right? You can just go use, you know, get a prefix full of addresses and you've got plenty of addresses to use. There's not much leverage there. There's not much of a business motivation to try to take over the control and assignment of addresses. Paul's right. In the IoT world, we need to be very careful about address assignment, DHCP as a potential attack vector, because of those devices don't have the capability of being fully secured at their endpoints. And again, with IoT, we've got the same issue of mutual trust, and how does an IoT device in a trustful way get itself integrated into a network where both the existing IoT network and the new device establish a mutual bidirectional trust when they're both starting with no shared information. And how can you then leverage that so that the IoT device, the IoT device needs some kind of addressing before it can communicate into the network. But in order to get an address, it's got to get the address from the network to start with. So there's a tough engineering problem, solved there. Okay.
So now we'll move to some questions that were asked by the audience, or by the 90-something people or whoever this is here. So Paul, what do you think of the attempts to replace DNS? Is it needed? And what are your thoughts on things like MR DNS, if you know much about that?
There's a variety of past and present and probably future. I think it'll probably eventually happen. I'm not quite, I think, you know, you have to think about adding some radical new capability in order to be successful at that. I'm not quite sure what that radical new capability would be. But you know, sooner or later, it's bound to happen, and it'll be something that combines all of the information and carries legacy DNS traffic within it, I think. So I kind of view it as inevitable. I'm just not sure what's going to be the incentive to spark that. You know, is it going to be, well, gee, it's some, you know, new Bitcoin addressing that is in there and you can do payments along with IP addresses, or it'll be something presumably a little bit far out. But I mean, I think it's inevitable.
Okay. Start with Ralph this time. Ralph, what would you have done differently when you were designing DHCP? This is the Donald Sharp question, by the way, but somebody else asked it, so I thought I would repeat it.
What would I've done differently? Nothing radically different. In the specifics, probably would have not bothered trying to wedge it into the BootP format and just design the new packet format from the beginning. Probably would have tried to keep better control over the options, because we ended up with a bunch of essentially pirated option numbers that we had to go try to reconcile at some point in the development. In order to help support that, might have designated an area of DHCP options as experimental, you know, free for anybody to use at any time for their own local purposes. But aside from that, those things, we might have done something better about redundancy and failover, so that multiple servers could be pulled together into a redundant server group.
Okay. So same question, Paul. Any changes you would have done different for DNS? You would have included everything perfect the first time? No.
You know, I might not have included it the first time, but early on in the evolution, I would have done it. At any rate, you know, compression and, you know, the requirements for adding new resource record types would be a couple of things that, you know, I would like to have my chance to take yet another first hack at. I would have mandated that all of the well-known numbers be put in a DNS database. One of the things, I was at an IETF in the Dominican Republic, and people were talking about, well, gee, we wish we had mnemonics for ASN numbers. How could we possibly do that? And I said, well, why don't we just put them in the DNS? You know, it would be easy enough to go do that. And they said, no, because then a router might fail because its DNS wasn't working. I said, this is really stupid. We could think about creating DNS databases that had ratchets in them, in the sense that they would always get new information, but they would never discard stuff. So that, you know, the ASN feed, if it worked, you would get mnemonics, and if it didn't work, you would get, you know, the numbers that you get. But, you know, why don't we use the system to propagate that kind of information? And I think that at various times when I was a division director at ISI and a program manager at ARPA, I might have just put my thumb on the scale and said, thou will implement this right to keep me happy. And given it its shot. I sort of wish I had done that.
So going back to Paul, how do you get senior level management to understand the complexities of DDI and see it as something that's critical to the network rather than just something to like, yeah, it's there, but you know, whatever?
You know, the best that you can do is to try and help them out when they're on fire. My favorite example of this is, you know, that research institute that I was talking about that got invaded by at least the Chinese. They had a thank you lunch for me And they explained that while they really appreciated the fact that I had helped make their network secure again, all of their research gets published. So in a sense, having people invade their network and steal all of their data is just early publication. So, you know, they didn't really, and I said, do you realize they could like open the doors to your biosafety labs and they could turn your institute off? And they went, no, that's not the same thing. They were just taking data out. So, you know, I kind of tried to explain to them that
as long as we steal information, as long as they're stealing information, we don't care.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of people that are kind of like that. And so you have to kind of try and explain to them how to do it. But at the end of the day, the CFO and the CISO, I think you have to explain to them why this infrastructure is important and hope that they're, you know, willing to reach a compromise. You know, I don't think there's anybody that knows the answer to the question of how do you decide how much of your resources should go to security? And, you know, I mean, that's a complicated issue. And so I think you got to try and simplify it and you got to try and motivate people. But at the end, you know, it's a risk analysis that all you can do is inform people and hope they make better judgments.
So do you have any different answer than that, Ralph?
No, not really. It really is a risk analysis, an amount of effort. If you can quantify it, the more you can quantify it, the more you can come up with specific scenarios. Suppose we have to reorganize the internal architecture of our network. What's it going to take to fix the addressing scheme in the DHCP server we're using? Is it an easy thing to configure, or is it something where the configuration tool is, as Paul was saying, the configuration tool is Emacs, and I've got to go in and edit a bunch of ASCII text files and hope that I get them all right when I turn the DHCP server back up in the newly architected network. It's that sort of, or suppose I have a major power outage in a big chunk of our network. The network comes back up, and the DHCP server gets overwhelmed because it's receiving too many DHCP requests, and it goes into a congestion collapse, which can happen. The way DHCP works, the servers can be susceptible to a kind of a congestion collapse if there are too many host requests coming in at a time. So you've got to just walk through those things and point out here's what it's going to cost if we don't have the right DDI system in place, and here's what we can save by having the right one in place. Here's the processes, here's the specifics, and here's the difference it can make.
Okay, so
doing the analysis is what you have to do. In my prior life at a company called Nominum, we sold DHCP servers to Walmart, and the reason they bought it is that they calculated how much revenue they would lose if the store wasn't able to run its cash registers for an hour. And after doing that, they decided that they wanted to have dual redundant DHCP servers running on different hardware and different operating systems. Since then, they've gone to a single vendor for the servers and stuff. But you know, they did the risk analysis. The hard part is that they could do it, but other places wouldn't. A funny story with this is I talked to United Parcel Service once about DHCP and making it reliable, and you would think that all of their stores would have the same argument as Walmart. And they said, no, if the network isn't running right, we don't want to be able to take packages because we won't be able to guarantee that we can deliver them. So, you know, I guess that was a valid risk analysis. You know, we don't want to promise to deliver something if we don't know that we can.
A busy signal on your UPS package. I guess that's quality of service.
Yeah, right. Exactly. You're pushing the congestion out of the network. So hey, our network's working fine.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we'll cut off the questions there because we're about 2 minutes to the top of the hour. I don't know if Kristen wants to jump back in and start with the rest of the program. Are you there?
Sure, I'm here. Earth to Christian, welcome. Thank you everyone who who submitted all those wonderful questions. And I think if you're not familiar with Zoom reactions, it's on the lower right-hand portion of your screen. If you could just give a round of applause for our speakers, Paul Mockapetris, Ralph Droms, and Russ White. Thank you guys all so much. It doesn't get any more techie than that, giving digital applause via Zoom chat. But Paul, Ralph, Russ, I'm not sure what the rest of your afternoon holds, but if you're able to hang out with us through the awards and appreciation, obviously you will be appreciated in our appreciation slides, but I understand fully if you have other commitments, you're very busy. But again, no pressure to stay, but you are more than welcome. And with that said, we will move into the next part of our day. Quick thank you. I just did the first part. Thanks to our speakers and hosts. But most of all, the whole point of today and hopefully years going forward from here is to say thank you to all of you, guys and gals and folks who've been on the front lines of DDI, fighting in the trenches. We can make it as dramatic as we sound, but I've been running the network VIP community for 18 months, just over now, and I've gotten a great chance to speak to a lot of amazing people, far smarter than I. There's not a day that goes by that I don't have a headache when I log off for the end of the day, but that's tells you you're learning something. But thank you guys all. And to show my appreciation, I've been tallying every nomination or tag we've gotten on our LinkedIn post. If you haven't had a look at that yet, look on the BlueCat LinkedIn. And I have taken anyone who's taken the time to register for this event today, and I have wanted to show my appreciation by, if you've not had your name up in lights before, this is probably one of the best ways I could offer it to you guys. Just to point out some familiar friends: Bob Harold, Peter Reidner, David Muscat, Jeff Allen, just to name a few on this slide. We got a few of them here. Obviously, we couldn't go through this without acknowledging and including the founding members of this community, which are Paul Mockapetris and Ralph Droms. We appreciate all your contributions, so thank you. Zachary Belly, Frank Ciesnick, some really outstanding members, John Macy of our network VIP community, people who've taken the time, Dan Watkins, who've taken the time every week to contribute to the community and help out their fellow colleague here, even if they're in competing companies. It's all about getting to the end goal, and a high tide raises all ships. One more to go after this. Some folks probably couldn't be here today, but we've even had some folks here at BlueCat that we wanted to make sure that we thanked and acknowledged, experts in their field, past and present. We've got Eka Maurer here, former BlueCat, but obviously a friend as always. And we've got John Sergotis from our IT team, Scott Penny, Chris Buxton, a few names here. And our last slide here, I believe I see Denise Donahue somewhere on here. So we wanted to make sure we added your name there as well. And yeah, just overall, just thank you to all of you. That is the appreciation portion. And yes, apparently there is I made one typo, someone just pointed out. Went through it 100 times, still gonna make one. And now I'll bring Jim back. And we should actually get through this a little quicker to give you all some time back in your day. I thought that appreciation part was gonna take a lot longer when I initially thought I was gonna read everyone's name, but we got a bigger response than we did. Jim, why don't we go through this first slide here?
Sure, great. Thanks, Christian. So again, it's the final part of today's ceremony, and I think Christian came up with the idea of, hey, we should give out some awards to some folks that are doing some extraordinary things. Definitely keeping the lights on, but I think every one of you that does this job know you're doing much more than that. And we said, okay, well, what would you want to recognize people for? What kinds of things? And I think that start with 3. look, I'll be totally honest with you. I am one of the marketeers, as was referenced earlier. I'm hoping that this 3 categories moves on to 5 and then 10 and then 15 with a lot more nominations. I'm really proud of the number of nominations we got. We literally got dozens that came in as soon as we announced these, but the 3 categories that we're going to be awarding people for this year in the inaugural event is the Automation Award, which is pretty straightforward. The Silo Breaker Award, which we'll talk a little bit about. It's all about collaboration and extending across the aisle or across the departmental lines, as the case may be. And finally, a much heralded, much anticipated, and much craved DDI Guru Award, which I frankly told Christian is a bit risky because I think there's quite a few people that consider themselves gurus in this community, but we're going to attempt to name one and not piss off everyone else.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, we will roll into the first one, which is our Automation Award. As Jim kind of alluded to, it's for someone who saw a better way to do something or looks for a better way to do something at all times and pursues it, whether that means automating a process or implementing a new solution. As Jim said, we had dozens of nominations from all people DMing us on LinkedIn. We had people from our community sending me messages, obviously the nomination forms that we promoted. But there were a few names that came up time and again. So I'd like to, at the very least, give these folks a moment to acknowledge them on behalf of the greater DDI community. First up, we've got John Macy from Cerner. He's on the call here today. Patrick Ward from Porsche. I think I said that right. It's either Porsche or Porsche, one of the two. I don't own one, so. We have Leandro de Faria Freitas from CGI. I'm not sure, people are laughing at my pronunciation, that's fine. And Bob Harold, as I mentioned, old friend, DNS Bob, you'll see on his screen, that's his avatar. So wanted to just give a round of applause to these folks for being nominated here today. Yes. And without further ado, when I announce the award, I will read the nomination that really put it over the top for us in making our decision. So, Jim, you ready? All right.
So we are very, very pleased to recognize John Macy from Cerner as the winner of this year's inaugural year Automation Award. For any of you that have worked with John or interacted with John, and I'm sure that's most of you that are in Network VIP, you know that he is constantly talking about the value of automation. This quote, I think, really sums it up. You know, he's constantly looking for efficient ways. He's an API first guy. He's got over 70,000 lines of code related to automation alone in his organization. Thinks of API as the first class citizen, and believe me, he is always pushing his vendors towards more and more automation capabilities. Loves to talk about moving at machine speed, not human speed. And that's why, obviously, John Macy is the winner of this year's Automation Award. Congratulations, John, and thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Got it.
And we forgot to mention, there are actual awards that will be sent to all of our winners. Jim, do you have the award?
I can only, I have to hold it right in front of me because of the background, but it is beautiful. This is not engraved, but I'll start chiseling shortly after this call.
So I'll be in contact with any of our winners before we move on to make sure I get all the proper information. So these are sent directly to your home, and you can use it as a paperweight or something for the dog, or actually put it in a place of prominence. It's all up to you. But congrats, John. All right, next up, we have the silo.
I think we should switch it up. I'll do nominations. You do the winner this time, since you're running this community. How's that sound?
That sounds great. All right, go ahead, Jim.
All right, good. So the next one is the Silo Breaker Award. This is focused at collaboration. The last thing you want is DDI operating in a silo. That's a really, really bad idea, right? So this award basically is someone who reaches across the aisle to work with counterparts in security, DevOps, cloud, server teams. Sometimes if you're not in a network team, clearly a network team. So just in a way that makes things better for everything. The best use of DDI, of course, is integrated into all elements of the IT stack and critical infrastructure. that sounds really good on paper. It's not always easy to do. So we wanted to recognize people that go above and beyond. In this case, here are some of the nominees that we got that were sent in, either again through social posting or actually delivered to us. In some cases, internal teams wrote up long descriptions about why this person might deserve the award. They are Mike Tyner from GDIT, John Macy, shocker, you got another nomination for another category. David Muscat, he's at IBM Watson or Truven Health. Oliver Herman from Porsche, I call it Porsche, sorry. And finally, we got Carlos Mazo de Pablo Roche from Porsche as well. So 2 people nominated from the same organization around the Silo Breaker Award. So
Jim,
yeah.
it's Ian here. I think Carlos might actually be from Roche rather than Porsche.
Oh, I got that back. Okay.
And it's pronounced Porsche.
Porsche. I'm
Well
American.
played, yeah.
Okay, my bad, from Roche. My apologies there. Christian, I'll do the drum roll, you go ahead. Please tell us who's the winner of the Silo Breaker Award this year.
This year's Silo Breaker Award goes to David Muscat. David Muscat, I believe you're in here today. I think I saw your name pop up. Maybe you just left away from the screen.
Yeah.
But David has been a member of our community as well. And we received several nominations for David in this category. Just a testament to the fact that he is a true team player. People see him for that. And this nomination here says it all. Dave has been in the IT space since 1986. His first job was as a computer operator. He's a trusted advisor within his organization, as well as for partner vendors. David's attention to detail and thought-out problem-solving methods help bring his team together while overcoming challenges or difficult tasks. So it goes without saying, the nominations and the quality of the nominations for David Muscat. Congratulations. If you are here, say a quick hello. Maybe he had to drop off, but he was here earlier in the call. We will contact him afterwards to congratulate him formally. And we're coming up to the home stretch now, folks. We've got our last award of the day. Jim, are you teeing this one up or am I teeing this one up?
I'll tee it up for you, buddy.
All right, thank you.
All right, finally, it's going to be the DDI Guru Award. Again, much coveted. Everyone wants to be a guru in this space, from what I've learned from watching the community. The idea here, of course, is we're just going to look for someone that really dedicates themselves to understanding DDI, becoming an expert. We call them an overall master, a thought leader, someone who might be looking ahead to what's coming in the future. I'm sure they were on this call, given the panel of experts and the discussion that just occurred. Broad and deep DDI knowledge, and more importantly than any of that is just the willingness to jump in and share it and help other people in the community, which is what NVIP is all about. We got a lot of nominees here. As you might expect, I'm going to walk through them and do my best to pronounce everyone properly. There's Grant Hagen at GDIT, Killian Kraus from the University of Stuttgart. I'm going to just say Manjuna M on this last one. Thank you for that nomination and for the challenging last name. I'm going to say Manjuna M from HCL. John Matthews Sterner, again, Zach Belli from GDIT. Paul Roberts from PCN and Tesco. David Muscat, again, was nominated. And finally, Andrew Cornelius from Telefonica. So a good long roster of DDI experts. Christian, who is the winner of this year's DDI Guru Award? Well,
there's a bit of a personal note before I reveal this award. This person, when I first started at BlueCat, was one of the first phone calls I made. And I don't know if I lived to regret that phone call or if I actually made a great friend during that call. But he knocked my hair back with conversations about Kubernetes and a whole whack of things that I was super green on and didn't have any understanding. So he's been a friend and always an honest person in terms of feedback and sharing his knowledge. But it goes without saying, Killian Krause from University of Stuttgart, who's here with us today. Congratulations, sir. Well deserved. So I'm going to read the nomination that we received for you. Actually, I had to put both of them in here. I thought they were both very good. Killian has been consistent in his sharing of knowledge and insight into all aspects of DDI, as well as IT in general. He's extremely knowledgeable and approachable, which in the field of IT leadership is not all that common. There are few people who have both width and depth of knowledge in this industry, and Killian is one of those elite. So Killian, congratulations. We appreciate all that you bring to our community and to the greater DDI community.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone also for those nominating me. Thanks for Christian for having me, and sorry for really having that rough jump start. I hope you've recovered by now.
Only a couple of Palanels and Advils after that day, but it was well worth it. I think we broke the ground well on that first day, and Killian's always giving great feedback into our community. Same with John and a few others who are regulars on our calls. But thank you, Killian, and we will be in touch to give you all of your awards. And Jim, you want to take us home?
Sure. Listen, again, this is a great first run. 90 minutes, great panel discussion. Thank you very much, Paul, Russ, Ralph. Awesome discussion. Gave me so much context and so much perspective into the start of the whole thing and where we're going from it. It was great. I would encourage all of you to continue the appreciation. Okay, we have one day, but reach out. You know people in the community that are kind of hard at work doing this job, and just give them a quick thank you. If you can't, give them a hug. Look, I'd like to make this a yearly thing. I expect it will continue. I'd love to hear more stories of DDI heroism as we move forward. And I would encourage those of you that really want to get into this, learn much more, build that community, help each other out, learn a thing or two to join Network VIP. It's an open Slack community. It's pretty much a free-for-all, not just DDI, but pretty much anything around IT and networking. I'd recommend that you do that. We will be sharing the recording of today's event. We're going to share that, of course, in Network VIP. And so check it out if you'd like to do a recap, and I'm sure we'll be blogging about it as well. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Christian. Great job putting this together. And carry on.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy DDI Day.